this one. Okay. All right. We are back live with a Louis B. Free radio show, Brain Food from the Heartland. And I am so delighted to have returning to the show, Dr. Melanie Joy. Doc, good morning. Welcome back.
Hi, Louis. Good morning. Well, I'm delighted to be back. It's always a pleasure and so enjoyable to talk to you. I love it. So thank you.
I love it also. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background before we get into the topic.
Sure. So I am a psychologist, a social psychologist, and I am an author. I've written 7 books. I'm best known for my book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, which is on the psychology of eating animals. I'm the founding president of the NGO, the international charitable organization Beyond Carnism. And so my work looks at really the psychology that enables and often drives people, all of us, to support harmful practices that run counter to what we really want for ourselves and our world, and run counter to our core values. And what is it psychologically that causes us to participate in things that are not good for us and not good for the world, and how can we actually learn about this and change those behaviors for personal empowerment and to help create a healthier world for all beings.
And you've done an incredible job with that. And if people get more information, we got linked up to carnism.org. When you wrote the book, and I want to go back because it's been years now. When the first edition, correct?
Yes, when I first wrote Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, it was published in 2010. And then in 2020, we had our 10th anniversary edition come out. So it's been a while.
I know you've got to be delighted with the response.
I never could have anticipated the response that I've got to the book. The book is published now in maybe 20 languages around the world. It's best selling in some languages. It's been really exciting to see the response to it. I mean, the reason that I even founded Beyond Carnism was because of this overwhelming response to the book, and I kind of had to have somewhere to send people for more information and then to provide more resources. So, but what I'm really most excited about is not that so many people have read and responded so positively to the book, but what this actually means and tells us about what's going on in the world around this issue of eating animals. I mean, don't get me wrong, we have some very serious existential, and ethical problems that are facing the world today. We know that. Animal agriculture it is a global atrocity. There's no question about that. And what I'm seeing, and the response to my book shows me this, but I have, had a lot of conversations with a lot of people all over the world, is that more and more people are becoming increasingly concerned with their impact, not only on, their own bodies, but also on animals and on the environment, and are really starting to question the legitimacy of eating animals. And that's very hopeful.
That is very hopeful. And it's interesting to see how, when I read surveys or how many people in the UK are reducing, their meat consumption, and seeing all of the products. Again, and I'm thrilled to see them, whether I'm going to use them or not. I love to cook, so I don't use a lot of processed. I do occasionally, but I love seeing that expand. And when I see some of the products in what they used to call the dairy case, the refrigerated area, and some of the milks, etc., it's just I'm thrilled to see, because that's the place of something. They're not building new refrigerated stores I go to, so it's taking the place of something because of the sales.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. I am called by a family member a vegan curmudgeon, because I say sometimes, Dr. Joy, the kids these days, they don't know what it was like back when you had to make your own soy milk, or go to a Chinese restaurant and ask them to sell you tofu, just raw tofu, etc. It's just
I remember those days. I went vegan or vegetarian, and then shortly thereafter vegan in 1989, and it was like it was just. I remember there was soy milk back then, but the soy milk was like white water. It was really terrible. I mean, I could not have imagined the world today with this incredible plethora of products, of plant-based products. And, you can basically get a plant-based version of just about anything that is traditionally animal-based now. And in many places around the world, not just in the US. I mean, I've been to over 50 countries now talking about this issue. And I always go to the new vegan restaurants, and I'm just seeing this explosion in support for veganism and vegan products everywhere. And I'm in Kuwait getting some of the best vegan cheese I've ever had. And it's pretty fascinating.
It is that old joke about vegan cheese from years ago. Did you hear the vegan cheese factory burnt down? And his response is, yes, everything melted but the cheese. Now they melt. They tasted okay back then, but now they melt. And some of the soy milks from back then. I stopped eating flesh when I was in school in 1970, and it was difficult. We actually went with my friends. And forgive me telling the stories, but went to, I think it was Burger King, and they got their burgers, and I went up. Was probably at this time 17 years old, and I said, because their saying was, hold the pickle, hold the lettuce, special orders don't upset us. And I said, hold the meat. And they looked at me and I said, yeah, everything but the meat. They actually thought the manager came out and thought I was being disruptive or something. And I said, I don't eat meat. Oh, they got it after a while. And when I go back with my buddies, they would know, hold the meat. I was the hold the meat guy. But again, and now to see them, I just had a professor who's been on the show a number of times, was in the UK, took a lot of students up to see Stonehenge, etc. He's not vegan. He said, I was shocked that everywhere we went, pubs, small pubs, restaurant, they had vegan options.
Yeah. I mean, and this is great. And this is what I think, keeps me hopeful. Like I said, we have, major existential problems facing the world. Like climate change is a real issue, and so we can see there's sort of these parallel trajectories where on one hand, more and more people are becoming aware of and concerned about the exploitation of farmed animals and the problems just inherent in animal agriculture, whether you're concerned with farmed animal well-being or not. I mean, it is a leading cause of, human disease in many places in the world. And it's a leading cause, we know of, as the UN says, some of the most serious environmental problems facing the world today, not the least of which is climate change. And it is the number one cause of animal exploitation. So more and more people, they're coming at this conversation from different angles, but they are waking up to the reality that animal agriculture is a really serious problem that needs to be addressed with urgency. If we hope to have a really compassionate and just world, and if we hope to have a planet to leave to our kids.
And when you say that, I know with the discussion about climate change, when someone will be talking with me about, this and that's happening, I said, oh, you're vegan. And they'll say, well, no. And they'll go on. I said, wait a minute. So you're not doing the one thing that you can do personally?
Okay, sorry.
Well, it's just, and go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought you were done.
Please.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think, this is one of the things that I think is really critical for us to be talking about when we're discussing animal agriculture and climate change, which is that the climate justice movement is focused away from personal choices to a large degree. And there is good reason for this, right? Because we're not going to spare the climate. We are not going to mitigate climate change the way that we need to if we're doing, appealing to one person at a time and asking them to drive less and to fly less. I mean, yes, personal choices matter, and we need to include that in the conversation. But one of the reasons that climate advocates have been uncomfortable with some forms of vegan advocacy sometimes is because they see it as sort of a consumer-focused movement, a movement that's focused on consumer outreach. Let's just appeal to the goodwill of people and get one person at a time to change their diet, where climate advocates are saying, we can't do that. We need to be looking at institutional change, like big picture systemic change. And there's this sort of false belief that's emerged that either, you're a climate advocate and you're focused on institutional change, or you're a vegan advocate and you're trying to get one person at a time to change. And that's a false dichotomy. It's a false difference. Like, What we need to do is work on institutional change when it comes to animal agriculture, which is what we need to do for the climate and the animals, right? And individual change. We can do both. We can say, just
exactly.
like,
Doesn't have to be a divide.
drive less and demand policy change, eat less meat and demand policy change.
Dr. Melanie Joy, one of the things when you say that, and I've had attorney Bill Marler on numerous times over the years, and he's a food safety, he sues, back to the Jack in the Box case, which was, I don't know, 30 years ago, about E. coli and undercooked hamburgers and all of those things. And so he has stayed with that and now does it internationally. He teases me a lot, by the way. He says normal people don't eat kale. And it's a friendly relationship. I mean, but he has said, we've talked about this. He's not vegetarian, eats meat. When we've talked about the E. coli and all the cases and how many more cases there are, that's from animal agriculture. I mean, some of them are wild animals, but it comes from those big waste, horrible and slaughterhouse runoff. God, I was just listening to a report yesterday or the day before, and they were talking about some stream they used to call the Red River because that's where the slaughterhouse blood and everything. Oh, it was horrible, horrible when I heard that. And he has said that's where the E. coli comes from, and is not sure that we can eliminate it at this point because it's so widespread, which is horrifying. Because it gets into produce. It gets into our produce. I mean, I don't want anybody to get E. coli and get sick. Don't misunderstand. But wow, I mean, you've got to really make sure you wash your produce really well.
Yeah. And it's also, I think, part of what I'm taking out of this, or I'm reminded from listening to what you're saying is, I forget the person's name. It's a zero waste activist, actually, who said, we don't need everybody doing zero waste. We need enough people doing zero waste enough. And I would say the same thing, when it comes to animal agriculture and plant-based or vegan eating. We don't need everyone to go vegan now. We need enough people to eat vegan enough to tip the scales of power, to create change. And so there are people, some of the people who actually do the most for the movement. And the movement here, I'm talking about plant-based or vegan movement here, like moving away from carnism and animal agriculture. Some of the people who actually do the most are not vegan themselves, right? But they're having an incredible impact. So I think one of the things that's really important for people to consider is that, well, yes, I mean, it makes sense when you are vegan, you think, well, if you really believe in veganism, why not just be vegan yourself as you work toward bringing about change in all these different ways? Maybe you're a donor, maybe you're, somebody who's starting a cultured meat, facility or whatever. But for many people, they just don't feel, it doesn't feel possible for them, like psychologically possible, to be completely plant-based. And they just can't, make that, they don't feel like they can make that transition, but it doesn't mean they can't make a huge impact, right? So just for example, some of the people who interview me about carnism, which I know we'll talk about, and eating animals, they are, most of the people actually who interview me are not vegan, and they're not even vegetarian. Most of the people who publish the books that I write are not vegan, and they're not vegetarian. And yet they put a tremendous amount of effort into getting this message out. Wonderful. And reach hundreds of thousands and millions of people. Those people, are probably reducing harm to animals more than one person who simply doesn't eat animals during the course of their lifetime. So there are lots of different ways to do this. So I think if we think about people as allies, like, how can you be an ally? How can you support this cause in a way that feels like it works for you? We're more likely to build bridges across movements. And, here I know we're going to be talking about building bridges across the climate movement and the plant-based or vegan movement. So
climate carnism, Dr. Melanie Joy, tell me.
Well, I think we should probably start with carnism for people who are not familiar with what carnism is, right? So, and I know you're referring to this a phrase that I use in a new video that we recently released on the urgency of making animal agriculture a climate priority. And so carnism, for people who are not familiar with the term, is the invisible belief system that conditions us to eat certain animals. It's essentially the opposite of veganism. We tend to to assume that only vegans and vegetarians follow a belief system. But the only reason we learn to eat pigs but not dogs, for example, is because we do follow a belief system when it comes to eating animals. So when eating animals is not a necessity, which is true for many, though not all people in the world today, then it's a choice. And choices always stem from beliefs, but people aren't aware of this belief system. They're not even aware. Most of us, we're all just born into carnism. We're born into, it's a dominant system. That means that it's beliefs, this belief that we should be eating animals, that eating animals is the right thing to do, is so widespread and invisible. It's literally woven through the structure of society. It shapes our norms and laws and beliefs, behaviors, so on. So when we study nutrition, we study carnistic nutrition. When we open a business, it's often a carnistic business. Medicine is often carnistic medicine, but we don't see this bias that's built right into the system because we don't see carnism, because the belief system, had not been named. So what carnism does, though, that's really important to be aware of, and let me just qualify something, because I said that some people do need to eat animals. And what I mean by that is not that they physiologically need to eat animals. The human body is, perfectly capable of not having any animal products put or carnistic products put in it. It's just that some people are not economically advantaged. They cannot economically make their food choices freely. But for people who can make their food choices freely, it's really important to recognize that eating animals is based on this belief. So the thing about carnism that's most important, I think, for people to understand is that it runs counter to our core moral values that all of us espouse to a greater or lesser degree. Our values of caring for others or compassion, and our value of justice, of doing what's right and doing what's fair. If you ask most people around the world, they will say, yes, of course, these are values that I espouse. And yet, contributing to animal agriculture, which can only be called a global atrocity, is completely antithetical to these values. And when we contribute to animal agriculture through buying and consuming animals, we are basically contributing to creating the opposite of outcomes of what we want in the world. We're contributing to violence and animal exploitation and climate exploitation and harming our bodies. But most people are completely unaware of this. And carnism it's a violent system. It's literally organized around violence. It is actually an oppressive system. So most people would never willingly contribute to carnism. And so systems like carnism need to use a set of psychological defense mechanisms. And these defense mechanisms distort people's perceptions. They distort our perceptions so that we act against our core values and our own interests and the interests of others without realizing what we're doing. So when we look, for example, if you imagine that you're not vegan, imagine that you are a meat eater, and you're biting into a juicy hamburger, and your dining companion turns to you and says, Louie, that hamburger is not made from beef, it's made from golden retrievers. Now, chances are your experience dramatically changes, even though nothing about that meat changes at all, right? What you just saw as food, you suddenly see as a dead animal. What you just felt was delicious, you suddenly feel is disgusting. And therefore, instead of continuing to eat the burger, you probably, you throw it in the trash and you want to take to the streets and protest. Your feelings, your behavior, your thoughts, your feelings and behaviors are completely different when it comes to the idea of eating golden retrievers than when it comes to the idea of eating cows. Not because there's anything substantially different between cows and golden retrievers. Obviously, they're different animals, but they are, like all animals, sentient, conscious beings who have lives that matter to them. And you know that very well. The only change is how you have learned to think about cows and how you've learned to think about dogs. Your response to the golden retriever burger is your natural response. So the problem is that we've all been born into this system that is carnism and deeply conditioned to believe that eating animals is the right thing to do, that eating animals, we've been conditioned to believe in a set of myths that I call the three myths, the ends of justification, that eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. We've been so deeply conditioned to believe in this mythology. And We've been conditioned to feel defensive against anything that helps open our eyes to the truth. Carnism conditions people to resist the very information that would get them out of the carnistic box. So I can give some examples of defenses if you want, but this psychology is really important to recognize, because when we're talking about the issue of eating animals, very often, if you're talking to somebody who's not vegan or who's not plant-based, and you start to raise the issue of animal agriculture or eating animals, you get hit by this wall of defensiveness goes up, and the justifications come at you. It's normal, it's natural, it's necessary, but humans have always been eating animals, but it's the right thing to do, but they're only animals. You know, I could go on and on about this. And it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to have a truly rational, objective conversation about the issue.
When you say some of that, Dr. Melanie Joy, you think about can't have a rational conversation, but you have, again, the video, and I've got the video posted. I mean, it's fantastic, because a lot of people don't think about that because of carnism.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So we made this video specifically for climate advocates, because the challenge is this: carnism distorts our perceptions. Carnism has shaped a psychology in us to make it such that we don't agree on the facts when it comes to animal agriculture, right? So very often when animal agriculture is a leading cause of climate change, we know that this is well established. And yet climate advocates, many climate advocates, not all of them, but many climate advocates who are people who are incredible. I mean, climate advocacy, in my opinion, is some of the most important work in the world today. I see people who have dedicated their lives to saving this planet. They are my heroes. Like, I'm so grateful. And I notice that in this conversation, I see, and many people, are saying, okay, animal agriculture, this is a leading cause of climate change, and it's not being included in the conversation. Why is animal agriculture not a climate priority? Why has it been kept out of the conversation? And it is this psychology of carnism. It's this psychology, and this is what I call climate carnism, right? It's the same psychology of carnism, simply applied to our conversations when we're talking about the climate. And I have talked to some of the most compassionate, justice-oriented, rational people who are advocating for climate justice. And I'll talk about animal agriculture. And then all of a sudden, this whole conversation turns into, but we need manure. And but what about the, and it's, yes, there are thorny, sticky, complicated questions that we need to be able to resolve. And we need to have this conversation and ask these questions. But talking about animal agriculture without being aware of carnism is like talking about sexual harassment without being aware of patriarchy. How can you possibly have an objective conversation about the issue if you're not aware of the psychology that's making you feel very wedded to the idea of needing to produce and consume animals? So most people who are, believe that animal agriculture is important would very likely never support animal agriculture if it was organized around using cats and dogs, because in their mind, eating cats and dogs is unethical, right? So we wanted to make this video at Beyond Carnism to help people get out of that carnistic box, not to say, here's the solution, here's the conversation you need to have, but to say, look, the whole point is to be able to have this conversation as rationally as possible and to find productive solutions. And we can't do that as long as we're looking at the world through the lens of carnism.
Carnism, yeah. I'm talking with Dr. Melanie Joy. And again, you can go to carnism.org for more information. And I've got the video posted also. Again, when you say that about, about carnism, and again, in your book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, which was such a brilliant title. Because
thank you.
It shocks people. Even the title would think, why is that? I mean, anybody that's, looking at objectively, or anybody who's thoughtful would hear that title. And it's like, why would we? Why am I? Go ahead.
And Yeah, and you're right. I mean, the title does get people to think simply because it breaks through like the carnistic norm, right? Because carnism conditions us not to ask why. Because of carnism, we don't ask ever. I mean, think about it. Most of us, including myself, I grew up, I never asked why I ate certain animals, but not others. Why is it that I have these stuffed animals that I'm sleeping with? Why is it that I have my dog who I love like a family member, and then my parents are feeding me chicken and fish and pork? I never asked that. Nobody ever asked me throughout my life, how I felt about eating animals, if I believed in eating animals, if I wanted to eat animals. Eating animals was just a given. Carnism prevents us from asking why we eat certain animals, but not others. It prevents us from asking why we eat any animals at all. And when we are confronted with this, something that breaks through or interrupts this carnistic consciousness, it creates a little bit of space in our minds to reconnect with our more rational, our natural sort of, I would say, our more thoughts and feelings about the issue.
And you bring that to light again with the video, which has gotten great response. You've got to tell me what you know of the response. I mean, it's shocking for people when they watch it first.
It's a bit shocking for people. Yeah, I mean, so what I wanted to do with this video, when I was scripting this video, was I did not want to just script a video about the importance of making animal agriculture a climate priority. I didn't want to just present the facts, because the facts are out there. People don't agree on the fact. People are not engaging with the facts in a thoughtful, rational way. They're defending against them. What I wanted to do was to make a video about why is it that we're not agreeing on the facts, because facts are facts. Why is it that people are actually debating an issue that they probably very likely would not be debating if they were engaging with it from a place that was not guided by carnism, So let me just give, for listeners, examples of carnistic defenses so they understand this sort of the psychological mechanisms I'm talking about. So one carnistic defense is, to simplify, we'll just call it abstraction. So carnism teaches us to think of farmed animals as lacking in any individuality or any personality of their own. So we learn to believe, for example, that a pig is a pig and all pigs are the same. Even though we know this not to be true. Pigs are just as intelligent, as not more intelligent than dogs, and sentient and conscious beings. We know this to be true. We know that people have pigs that are pets. We know that they are individuals with lives that matter to them, just like every individual has a life that matters to them. But carnism gives us the tools not to know. Carnism gives us a psychological tools so that we can disconnect from our authentic thoughts and feelings when it comes to the slaughter and consumption of those individuals we've learned to classify as edible. This mechanism, these psychological mechanisms, are distancing mechanisms. They distort our perceptions and disconnect us from our natural empathy from those animals we've learned to classify as edible. So what we wanted to do with this video was to really create a scenario where we substituted, kittens basically for chickens that people are supposedly being fed in this video, and show how people climate delegates basically and climate advocates, people who were coming together at an eco summit to talk about mitigating climate change and who thought they were eating chicken soup were told that they were actually eating kitten soup. And of course there was mayhem and everybody freaked out and they're throwing up and it's just all a big mess. And then in the video I say, well, what's the difference? Why is there a problem? I mean, what's the difference between eating kittens and eating chickens? And so the reason that I wanted to, sort of open with this scene and craft the video around this scene was to really demonstrate that if there is an ethical issue here, we are so deeply conditioned to think of chickens as edible that we don't react to the idea of eating them as disgusting, but we're not conditioned to think of kittens as edible. And so our reactions are more natural response. But even more important than this is that many people who are advocating to continue for animal agriculture, who believe that animal agriculture, or continuing with carnistic consumption as usual, I should say, many people who believe this are saying, well, chicken has a lower carbon footprint than beef, for example. So why not just eat chicken? And somehow eating chicken has been considered like the sort of the appropriate protein choice, when beans, and plants in general have a vastly lower carbon footprint. But somehow the idea of just eating beans or eating foods that are from plants and getting our protein sources from plants isn't really on the table in an appreciable way. So what I really wanted to do with this video was to raise awareness of the fact that we are conditioned by this belief system called Carnism to believe so deeply that we need to get our protein from animals, that we are not engaging in an appreciable way with the fact that we can get our protein from plants. It's healthier protein, in fact, as well. We can get our protein from plants. That's a vastly lower carbon footprint, but we're not really talking about this issue the way that we could be. I really want to encourage people in the climate movement, and to take on big ag the way they've taken on big oil.
They need to. I agree. I'm talking with Dr. Melanie Joy, carnism.org. Again, in saying some of that about about the protein, I've just got to say, as I said, I stopped eating flesh 52 years ago. Well, I understood people asking me about protein. I had family that was like, oh, maybe you need to get some blood work, because it was so offbeat at that time. But 52 years later, and really, when people ask me, so where do you get your protein? It's like, I kind of give them a look. It's like, for the last 52 years, if I wasn't getting enough protein, I think I would have been long gone many, many years ago.
Right.
And not realizing that. And that's what, like you say, with carnism, that's what we have been conditioned. People have been conditioned to believe. That's where you get your protein, even though the animals that are slaughtered got their protein, I'm going to do air quotes, no one's going to see, from plants, from plant-based items, grass, hay, whatever.
Right.
And it freaks me out. I'm sorry, Doc. I've just got to say, it freaks me out when I see, I won't mention with you, I don't want to get Louis on you, the ad, the TV advert about a big chicken company, and they're boasting about all their chickens are vegetarian fed. And it's like, really? I mean, when I hear that, the first time I heard it, I thought, I didn't hear that right. Then I saw it again and again. It's like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that.
No, but not at all. I mean, I think what you're pointing out is, rightly, Voltaire said, if we believe absurdities, we shall commit atrocities. And, what you're talking about is a carnistic absurdity, this idea that chickens who are, I mean, it reminds me of like these ads of like pigs dancing over the fire pit, in which they're, ads for pork, or bacon, of pigs happily dancing over the fire pit, on which they're, going to be barbecued. And it's just such a bizarre, kind of a horrific thing. And it's, if we believe absurdities, we shall commit atrocities. And, we're fed these carnistic absurdities, and people don't even see them for the absurdities that they are, which really tells you about how saturated, the world is with how widespread this carnistic mentality is.
Dr. Joy, for you, developing the concept of carnism, what was there I always say respect to Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote the book Tipping Point. Was there a tipping point or an aha moment?
It's interesting that you ask that. I've been asked that before, and the aha moment was when the word popped into my mind. Like I was kind of going through in my mind, I was doing the concept came largely from my doctoral research. Actually, I was a doctoral student when I was working on this, and I focused my doctoral research on the psychology of eating animals. And I was, interviewing people who were butchers and, meat cutters, and people who raised and killed their own animals for food. And I had interviewed vegans and vegetarians and meat eaters. And, I was like, wow, there's, I knew there was something going on psychologically. And I thought, all of these people, had such similar experiences, eating or killing animals, or, butchering animals or whatever, whereby they believed that animals were sentient beings. They cared about animals. They didn't want to hurt animals. And yet they participated in activities that were harming animals, and they were all going through the same kinds of psychological gymnastics. And I realized, like, widespread ambivalent behaviors like this, like, they don't exist in a vacuum. This is not a coincidence that everybody is reporting the same kind of experience. There's something much bigger going on here. There's an ideology, there's a belief system. Oh my God, that's it. There's an ideology. What is it? Wait a minute. It hasn't been named. There's something that needs to be named. And then, and then all of a sudden the pieces really fit together. But I had been on this sort of like investigative journey for a very, very long time, which is like, asking what is going on. Because when I became vegan, when I woke up to the issue and I stopped eating animals, I was just like, oh my God, it was like I woke up and I'm like, we're living in the midst of a global atrocity and nobody's talking about it. And like all the people around me, and I was one of these people too, we're just actively supporting it. There's like, I felt like I woke up in this collective insanity, which in some ways it actually is. And, so I really, really wanted to understand the psychology of what was going on and what was going wrong with us. And once I realized that the psychology was being sort of like fed from, stemming from, and then feeding back into, of course, is an ideology, then it was like, oh my God, all the pieces started to make a lot of sense.
And you've got to be delighted. I don't want to say surprised, but delighted with how globally it's caught on.
Yes, I think that the delight comes from, and I don't know, I would say that I feel grateful. I feel incredible gratitude. I think what makes me feel good about this is that it's an indicator that there is movement in the right direction in the world. Like, my book would not have found an audience if the zeitgeist were different. Like, this is the time to be having this conversation. And so it gives me hope. And a lot of the work that I've been doing since the publication of the book has been really building out tools and materials to support growing awareness and empower the people who are also trying to grow that awareness to do this as effectively as possible. Because it's hard to do this work and have these conversations with people about ideology.
And if you go to carnism.org, and we've got a link up to Help End Climate Carnism now, people can get more information. Could tell us take a minute and tell us about that?
Sure. So it would be, we launched this video on trying to like raise awareness of the climate carnism, essentially the need to make animal agriculture a climate priority, and sort of promoting it through this video. We launched the video just under a week ago, and we're really, really trying to. We really believe, many people believe, that it is absolutely essential that animal agriculture be made a climate priority. And, just because some people in the world need to eat animals, that doesn't mean the rest of us should just continue with carnistic consumption as usual. So we're really we want people who are really concerned about climate advocacy to include in their work, in their ask, to call on governments and institutions to be as plant-based as possible, which is necessary in order to be as sustainable as possible, like policies and practices. And so make plant-based the default at climate events, for example, or in certain public institutions, be as plant-based as possible. We're not saying you have to be vegan to save the climate today. We're saying, if you want to be as sustainable as possible, you need to be as plant-based as possible. We need to build this ask in. We need to make big ag an issue the way we need to take on big ag, the way we've taken on big oil. And until that happens, I don't think we're going to have the momentum that we need to have. So people, if you can share this video, hashtag it and share it, and send people to the landing page where they can take action, which is endclimatecarnism.org. And it's also written in the video. That would be great. We need this video to get traction in order for it to really have the impact that we want it to make.
It's fantastic. I'm in awe of you. And absolutely, Dr. Melanie,
No.
I'm in awe of you. You are amazing and such a incredible force for good.
Well, thank you, Louis. The same to you. Look at you. You're just like,
look at me
out there. But you're out there, you're having the conversations, you're saying what needs to be said, and you're bringing people into it and into these conversations. It takes all of us. So, thank you.
Let me just say that they're not translating my show into 20 different languages.
It's easier to translate a book.
BeyondCarnism.org. I hope you'll do the gig with me again. Again, I'm in awe of you and delighted, honored to have you on, but so grateful for the work you do in and for our world.
Yeah, and thank you so much. And same back at you, Louis. It's always heartwarming to talk to you and inspiring as well.
Thank you. We'll do it. Hopefully, I'll be bugging everybody to do it again whenever. Maybe down the road a little
I
bit.
would love to.
Videos, whenever. I don't want to be pushy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Melanie Joy, and we've got the links up, but you can go directly